Yeah, really cool. Thank you. That was worth a visit. When did I first come downtown? As a kid, my dad would bring me down here. We came from the valley. I remember him picking me up. And then as we drive, pointing out Angel's Flight and other areas. I've always loved the city, loved the history of the city. 1972, I was a student at UCLA and I had some spare time. Okay, I'm just going to park and walk down Broadway and take pictures. It was transformative for me. And the photos came out great. There were bodegas and crappy sock stores. It's a completely different world. I was living in Sherman Oaks in a house. Well, I had a child, I had a job. I always thought that I would do my art and record the city on my own. If you're doing that, you're going to be drawn to downtown. I mean, it started at Alvera Street, the birthplace of the city, and that's downtown. I'd already been introduced to Diane Arbus, to Ouija, to photography as an art. I'd gone from just taking pictures that were historic to images that stood on their own. I was earning a decent amount of money. I had a house. I could support my family. And somewhere around 78 and 79, I got drawn into punk rock. Someone left KROQ on in my darkroom, and I heard this music that was being made by local bands, being played in venues all over town, and that inspired me. There's something going on in this city that totally sidesteps anything you can read about. All these bands were going, we can play in Chinatown and we can play in wherever we can rent a hall, and this do-it-yourself, that inspired me. Finding culture that was taking me to different parts of the city, that's when I knew there's something really important and big going on here. A culture was building around this, something worth recording. So I quit my job. I moved to Echo Park, I got divorced. I'd made a life change. I began to get a reputation as a music photographer, but for me it's always been about Los Angeles. I'm an independent photojournalist. It's just what I do all day, every day. People don't recognize me if I don't have my camera. I've had pictures that have gone all over the world for one reason or another, but I was kind of covering the city at large. If I were to cover something and say I was with the L.A. Weekly, you'd get nothing but chuckles from people in the Times and the Daily News. You know, eyes would roll because it was the alternative press, and it certainly wasn't taken seriously. It is now. But I found a place at the Weekly. They had a column called La Di Da, started by Pleasant Gaiman, and it was a gossip column that covered the scene. They covered the Zero and covered all the different alternative music venues and music culture and art culture. The Weekly's premise at the time was if it's in the Times, we won't cover it. I had developed this idea that each week from the scene, my pictures would show up in La Di Da. That column became the place you wanted to be. Each week you wanted to show up. I met Carlos Guitarlos, lead guitarist in the Rhythm Pigs, at the Hong Kong. He was the doorman at the Hong Kong Cafe. Vicky Carr was getting her star on Hollywood Boulevard. And I asked Carlos if he wanted to join me to cover the star ceremony. At the end of the ceremony, I see Mayor Bradley. So I said, can I get a picture of you and my friend? No politician is going to say no to having his picture taken with anybody. And then I go, here's Carlos Guitarlos, and he did a double take. And this was the first time that I brought those worlds together, the establishment and this counterculture. That's when I kind of got an idea. Everybody's reading the Weekly. Everybody says, how'd you get that picture of Carlos Guitarlos and the mayor? And the impact it had told me I was on to something. First time I came to Al's Bar was because I was covering an X show. Everybody at the show, we'd all hang out afterwards. I mean, there was always a backstage scene. And they said, we're going to Al's Bar. They said east of Alameda. I knew where that was. I referred to it as the Al's Bar District. And then somewhere around 1990, I guess, they decided to call it the Art District. Now there's the Old Bank District, there's the this district, that district. This was Al's Bar District. Al's Bar was at the center of it. That's where you went. It was punk rock, but there was an art element to it. You could go to Al's and you'd find people who had been to all the other venues. The American Hotel should be landmarked. Put a plaque, save this building. Al's Bar was here. Mark was responsible for Al's, and he needs to be acknowledged for that. I don't know if you call it a genius. He made it happen. A lot of clubs came and went, but Al's endured. And that was Mark. You know, he knew how to reel it in when it became too popular. He had a vision. He absolutely made it happen. I like Mark. At some point, my cameras were stolen. Now I have insurance. Then I didn't. I was living like a lot of people were back then, very hand-to-mouth. Mark gave me Al's Bar, and we had a benefit there. Phil Alvin played, Carlos played, Lone Justice. It's weird being the spotlight. I got to know Joel a little bit. I know he's from Chicago. I knew he was an actor. He had the voice of an actor. He was doing sound at Al's. He had an interest in the neighborhood. He was an activist, really went to the meetings, really lobbied, really went to City Hall, got to know the city councilman, lobbied for bus stops and trees. He established what was needed in the neighborhood.
I think there can be a thriving arts community here.
I talked to Joel all the time when Hilby's was going on. We'd meet for breakfast. That was another great place. It didn't exist long enough. I think we talked politics a lot. I can't remember if we agreed or disagreed. He was direct. Get out of here. I would try to get along. He was just after me all the time to do a show. Want to do a show. You know, it was Bloom's General Store, so he had some walls. So I put together a limited edition over a 9-month, 10-month period. So he became a center. He became something special. This setting here, east of Alameda, this was the best neighborhood in the city. It just had the best setting. If the weather were good, this was such a pleasant place to be. There were afternoons and evenings where you could walk from the Atomic to Al's, because it was just a small community, but it was a community. After Al's, you'd go to Gorky's. That was another area, but it immediately established itself like it had been there 90 years. As soon as it opened, it was like the Pantry or Philippe's or Vickman's. It just was the right place at the right time. There hasn't been any place since. Opened 24 hours a day, an alternative to the Pantry. It was perfect. You could order special things, but then it was like this cafeteria. It was nice being in the company of all these like-minded people when the establishment wasn't that. I had a late adolescence, and this was part of it. I have a son who's 36. I drove him to the American Hotel, and the plane was gone. And he was so disappointed. I was just saying, hey, the plane was here, and he was so sad. That became a landmark. It's a shame it's not still up. It was the first time I kind of got that our neighborhoods and our buildings and the iconography that's around are taken to heart by the kids who grow up within it. I don't have pictures of the plane going up, but I have pictures of the plane coming down. There's a lot being lost. It was fun walking Broadway. That's now going away. They talked about it going away in mid-'70s, and it didn't, but now it is. They just opened up Urban Outfitters on Broadway. And I would have predicted it back then because I thought it was so nice. You know, I can't believe it took this long. It was October 1987. At the beginning of the month was an earthquake. And there was something in the air. And it's always the case after the earthquake. It's atmosphere, it's temperature, you couldn't have predicted it, but you should have, and it lingers. There's something actually beautiful about this common experience of disaster. And I was coming by the old Brew 102, and time stood still. There was this guy, he's naked, and he's on the sidewalk, and something else took over. I stopped, pulled over, got my camera, and knew I had something had happened that was special. I then said, "Can I give you some money?" He said, "I don't need your money. I have cancer." My response then was, "Did you get a second opinion?" You know, my father was a doctor. I grew up with this idea that you get a second opinion. And his response was interesting. "Why does everybody say that?" And that was it. This single image, people respond to differently than anything I've ever done before or after. They love it. It sells. As soon as I processed it and showed it to people, it just like had a life of its own. Don worked for the railroads. I ran into him on a train. He wasn't like Don was down here. I've certainly heard stories about the old Pullman operators and how there was a formality to them and they were gentlemen. And Don was that. And here he wasn't that at all. He was living the dream. He was showing you how you could live downtown with very, very little, you know, a room in the American Hotel, and his life was so rich. How could you hope for more? He was a collector. He knew the value of things. You'd run into him at house. He was always there. I mean, you couldn't come here without seeing Don. He was just ever present. Even when he was gone, you wouldn't realize he was gone. And then he was traveling the country on a train and being able to see so much. I mean, that's so romantic. These people had such big personalities. The Arts District is so on the radar of every single developer. I just went to a conference where it was the downtown Renaissance, retail, rentals, condos, and it was just filled. This city after the war was built on the suburbs. Now everybody's kind of getting with it and finding this attractive. No, there were these pioneers here who kind of got it first, and it was better then. It's better when you kind of have it all to yourself. It's so much fun being a pioneer.
Cut.